The importance of the work of Michelle Arevalos Franco in Mas Común, maintenance and care, construction and maintenance, maintenance and operations. These are more than buzzwords on a budget spreadsheet. These are actions connecting people to places and spaces and landscapes. Landscapes are built and cared for over time, like a good luthier who cares for a violin that is sometimes 100 years old. A single violin may have passed through many hands of many musicians and many luthiers. Like a landscape, it has a depth of memory that extends beyond the current musician that produces its sound and resonance. So let's consider that kind of long memory of landscapes as we acknowledge also where we stand in Lenape-Hoking, in this place called Coaquinac. I'm always happy to begin with an introduction of Azura Cox, an assistant professor here at Penn and a registered landscape architect and writer interested in the power of landscapes to shape and reflect deep, long collective narratives. During her 6 years of practice at GGN, she worked on urban scale projects across the country, including San Francisco's India Basin Shoreline Park, Pittsburgh's Hazelwood Green Plaza, and Milwaukee's Public Museum. Through this work, Azura explored how both the process and product of landscape architecture can deepen their relationships between communities and their places, and how landscape can amplify an existing power, lift up layered histories, and spur grounded activism. Azura brings a range of experiences from the world of publishing, curation, and design activism to her practice and research, which centers the myths and memories that live and are expressed in the land. Azura is also an accomplished violinist, and I bet she and her violin have many stories to tell as well. We're so delighted this evening to welcome Michelle Arevalos Franco to join us this evening in Philadelphia and to present this talk entitled Jardineros. And I'd like to now invite Azura Cox to the podium to properly introduce Michelle, our guest, and her practice, Mas Común. Azura.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again. I love Catherine's introductions. They're just do all the work. So tonight, super pleased to have Michelle Arevalos, Arevalos Franco here, and really excited for you all to kind of wrap up this series this spring, Making Our Way. Michelle seeks to cultivate thriving social and ecological relations through the work of landscapes. Her research is informed by her Mexican roots and explores landscape architecture's dependence on Latine immigrant labor for construction and maintenance. Critical to this work is the interrogation of race, class, and knowledge stratification inherent to contemporary landscape architecture practice. This work is both academic and activist, calling for institutional and individual reforms within the discipline. And her publications illuminate the discipline's complex political and social entanglements with immigration, and they've been enthusiastically received by diverse stakeholders. Landscape practitioners, academics, and students, as well as contractors, laborers, and tradespeople have acknowledged the urgency of Michelle's scholarship, which is committed to strengthening the value of physical labor and laborers within our discipline. To that end, her pedagogy expands traditional landscape education with community-based collective labor as an emancipatory and critical practice. Michelle is coming to us today from The Ohio State University, where she's an assistant professor in landscape architecture. She's also the founder of Mas Común. She is an inaugural research fellow of the Midwest Landscapes Lab, and her work has been supported by the Greater Columbus Arts Council, OSU's Global Arts and Humanities, and Ohio State Energy Partners. She has a landscape design practice at Ohm Ben Sweden and Associates in Washington, D.C., and holds a master's in landscape architecture from the GSD at Harvard. She was prior to the GSD, she was program director of the Richard Avedon Foundation in New York, and studied fine art at the University of Arizona. So I thought this would be a really great kind of closure to this lecture series because it really brings together research, practice, and I think an engagement with the real kind of work of landscape. The making our way, making our landscapes, who is making them, what is collective action and collective labor, and who are we kind of accountable for and to in this discipline. So I'll just start it off by playing the first video, and then we'll go from there. Okay, let's play.
Okay, what can we do? Yeah. You want to work, we can cut some inside?
Yeah, that one.
Sure, okay.
Hagan una enfermedad por dentro, un hongo, y usted piensa que no, pero sí se cae, sí se cae. Pero esas palmitas, como esa palmita para que se quiebre, no se quebran tan fácil. Las malas zonas, pero están buenas.
Yeah, there's, I cleaned up a little bit of one here last time I came, but yeah, this can hang down here. And then everything over here is looking good.
Yeah, this one I just recently trimmed too, but this was bush. You can't see nothing anymore.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Because all the plants are
Más bien, Diego. Le vamos a dar un 10 al Diego. Pero ya se quitó los guantes, Diego.
Sí, ya.
Ya, con toda mano ya. Eso está bien porque eso le quiere decir que la mano ya se está imponiendo a agarrar las ramas, las plantas, las espinas, todo eso. Ya no ocupó Diego los guantes, pero eso es bueno. Es buena idea que va a tener buen y buen trabajo. ¿Verdad, Diego?
Sí, sí. Aquí es la esposa cuando estoy con las manos todas.
Eso. Entonces ahora se le va a decir, ¿ya? Ponte guantes. Ella como ponte guantes.
No, desde chiquito toda mi vida me ha tocado mi papá.
¿Estás tu papá?
También tu mamá. Eso, yo me llamo José Alberto. Ya cada vez que tenía vacaciones me traía. Me traía a trabajar y aquí me quedé.
So we've been working on this property for 2 years, more than 2 years. But they really done a great job and really helpful, by that questions about what's happening with the landscape and community. And it's a difficult site. I mean, you see how steep it is. It takes a lot of skill to be able to manage it.
Se puede ya ni nada le pasa a uno con las espinas y todo. Nomás siempre hay que usar al final un poquita vaselina para que no se revienten las manos. Pero sí, no, todas estas marcas son de puro trabajo, quemaduras, marcas, de todo lo que hacen, todo. La otra vez con la motosierra que me volví y sentí que me iba a dar a los huesos, pero no. Yo son cosas del destino, son marcas de todo, de la vida. ¿Verdad?
Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle. Thank you so much for the beautiful introductions, and thank you all for being here tonight. I have been working on this project, Jardineros, for very intensely for some time now, so it's really wonderful to share it with you tonight. So I've been working for the past 5 years on this topic, this prickly, tangled, exuberant, and growing issue of immigrant labor in landscape architecture work. And so I've researched the topic in traditional academic methodology, but I've also extended that into ethnographic fieldwork, and I'm currently applying that research with partners in practice. And so the film you just saw is a part of that project, which I call Jardineros, which in Spanish means gardeners, but which for this project, I mean all of us who are involved in creating our world of work. So it's applied research, and I mean that by its alterations to the means and methods of standard landscape architecture practice that aims for inclusion, acknowledgement, and collaboration and care for immigrant laborers. So I'm partners in this work with Terremoto in Los Angeles, and I am very happy that we have like surprise Terremoto representation here tonight. Casey, wherever you are, thanks for coming. And also Reed Hildebrand in Massachusetts. And so I'm documenting our work. Oh my gosh, this is going on its own, sorry. So I'm documenting our work through the medium of film. So the film you just saw is part of that and exhibition. There's also drawings, documents, and photographs, which I'll show you a little bit of in this presentation. So the exhibition just opened up 10 days ago at Banvard Gallery at the Knowlton School of Architecture where I teach. So today I'll kind of lay out the work that led me to this project. I'll describe some of the efforts that my partners and I have made in this project. And I'll show you some of the exhibition pieces, and then I will end with one more of the short films. So my interest in labor began in practice. So I couldn't help but notice the racial stratification at play between the design office and the construction site and garden. The dynamic was really striking to me. It was super visible, undeniable even. I am at once part of the educated elite class of landscape professionals who intellectually craft the landscape, just as much as I'm part of this brown-skinned underclass who physically labors in the landscape. So I can cross this divide between professional and laborer through the shared language, geographic kinship, and also just familiarity with the physical aspects of the work itself. So it also means that I can see quite clearly these workers' invisibility in the profession in which I take part. So I wanted to know if landscape architects were representing immigrant labor in their work and how. And I wrote about this in my article, Invisible Labor, Precarity, Ethnic Division, and Transformative Representation in Landscape Architecture Work in 2022. So I'll share some key takeaways from that essay that remain important to me, especially related to the Jardineros project. One, landscape architecture's alliance with architecture in the process of professionalization, so the shift away from gardening, reinforced and continues to reinforce this division between intellectual and physical labor, and it plays out in fractures of class and race. As a profession which claims process as part of its domain, this division and devaluation of labor is antithetical because labor is process. And the embodied knowledge necessary to cultivate the ongoingness of landscapes is generally invisible, and those who hold it remain unseen and unacknowledged. In the United States, many landscape laborers are from Mexico and Central America, and in states with high rates of immigration like California, Texas, and Florida, that rate hovers around 80%. The profits of landscape industries, and that includes landscape architecture, rely on a global precarious labor regime, and immigrant laborers are tasked with what social scientists classify as work in the 3Ds, which is dirty, demeaning, and dangerous. So there's little to no representation of immigrant laborers' work or immigrant laborers themselves in the social, philosophical, or visual discourse of landscape architecture as a discipline. And representation matters. While we, as landscape architects, as designers, may not have direct agency over larger political dynamics, we do have jurisdiction, at least over drawing. And so we have agency over representing and reimagining the worlds created through design. So visual representation can lead to and is a necessary first step towards social representation, which we can imagine as inclusion, care, and being present inside of a community. And the last takeaway from that piece is that other worlds are possible. There are people working towards working differently. So this work was impactful for me, and I believe for the discipline. It has been read by many students and practitioners, and I hope that it continues to provoke conversation. But after writing this piece, I wanted to work in a more direct and embodied way, kind of taking a cue from the research itself. I wanted to learn directly from the people with the embodied knowledge of building and maintaining landscapes. So in spring 22, I began an ethnographic, kind of autoethnographic study by embedding myself in a crew of jardineros in Los Angeles. And this became the recently published chapter, Migration and Maintenance, Mesoamerican Making of Landscapes in El Norte. And it's a chapter in a Dumbarton Oaks publication called Landscapes in the Making. And so the experience of this research was really a huge foundation for the Jardineros project. One goal of this work was to begin rendering the lived labor of migrant workers in jardineria. So I hope to highlight the central role of Mesoamerican laborers in the making of landscapes in El Norte in the United States, and to document their contributions within the historical record so that those contributions weren't forgotten or left undocumented. And then in this project, I also developed a concept of working at what I call the scale of labor, which carries through in my current projects and also in my pedagogy. Here, informal conversations, quiet activity, and shared goals emerge under the construct of shared physical labor. And so the physical context of the work is very important because at this scale, the laborers are the experts. In the exhibition, the only photographs displayed are taken by gardeners or construction workers. In this piece, gardeners' photos, two longtime gardeners from Terremoto Projects, Alfredo Barreto and Juan Saucedo, were given disposable cameras and asked to kind of just take pictures around their work and their gardens. And that's Alfredo, self-portrait. I printed these large and displayed them alongside a number of other documents on the gallery wall. In this piece called Common Bond, I've arranged photographs taken by workers on site as progress photos that are kind of documented through this app called Builder Trend. So they submit these photos, progress photos, to their bosses. Sometimes the clients see them as well. And it's just a documentation of the project itself as it comes into being. I display these in sort of kind of the pattern of a masonry coursing known as Common Bond, which is the title of the work. And then here's some of the images close up. There's about 70 images total in that piece, and they're all by the construction workers. In 2024, after the ethnographic field work, I wrote a piece for landscape research on the concept of care in landscape studies. It's called Care's Repair, Landscapes Labor. And here I argue that this concept of care, which derives from feminist theory in landscape architecture, is a kind of hollow, a sort of care washing that is eco-technical and aesthetic. In contrast, outside of landscape circles, care is very human, very political, very affective, and it's a specific practice of social reproduction that's entangled in economic, political, and very human relations. So I argue that care in any conception necessitates this direct human connection, this cultivation of the human being. So I'm claiming here that care, if it's going to be a part of the identity of landscape architecture, we must unequivocally and actively care for the human beings doing landscape work, rather than merely exercising an indirect caring for humans through caring for the environment. So the essay delves into this particular case of migrant laborers entering the United States under guest worker visas in the H-2B program. landscaping is the #1 industry employing seasonal workers through the H-2B program. Mexican nationals outnumber guest workers from all other nations combined. They're about 73% of the total visas issued, and the second highest country is Jamaica at 9%. So in the paper, I highlight the extreme conditions of laboring under the guest worker program in the United States, drawing parallels to the fraught nature of guest worker programs globally. And so you may be more familiar with the exploitation and abuse that occurs within these programs on like mega construction projects in the Middle East. But guest workers in the United States often face similar antagonisms. And in the exhibition, I took the data that I parsed for the paper and created these guest workbooks, which allow us to see the number of visas given to landscape industries like groundskeeping, nurseries, tree work, masonry, and so on. And there are 2 books. They're the same data, but organized either by occupational code or state. So it makes it easy to look up if a contractor or nursery you work with employs guest workers. So in Cares Repair, I started to draw out examples of how landscape architects could begin to cultivate care for landscape workers through the disciplinary and humanistic apparatus of the profession. And as I was writing it, I realized that many of these steps were just perfectly actionable, like ready to test. And I didn't want to just continue writing about it. I wanted to see it happen. So Jardineros was born, and it's a collaboration, as I mentioned, with Terremoto and Reed Hildebrand. And we were already kind of in deep conversations about these topics, but I received a grant from OSU's Global Arts and Humanities Arts Creation Grant, which allowed us to document those conversations and those tests and apply them in the field. So we're taking an active approach towards these kind of thorny topics. Instead of letting them remain invisible, we are attempting to repair and renew our own practice as designers. So through lots of conversations and workshops and just showing up, it was like me showing up at their doors many times, we constructed some alterations to typical means and methods within practice that we hope allow for greater collaboration and acknowledgement for the work of immigrant laborers. The project is meant to test and instigate new modes of working together across these boundaries of race and class and social status. And throughout, I've been documenting on film, as you've seen, as this work unfolds in the field, both on construction sites, maintenance sites, gardens, but also in the office. And I'm embedded in both communities here with designers and also with laborers. So I'll share some of the tests that we've collaborated on. With Terremoto, as you saw a little bit of in the first film, designer and gardener worked together, gardening the garden. So drawing from my emphasis on working at the scale of labor, the premise here is that the designer can learn about the design, about the garden through physical labor, and primarily from the person who knows the site the best, who is the gardener. As we're probably all somewhat aware, it's not the client who spends the most time in the designed landscape, it's the gardener. And so even though we don't usually think of them as such, gardeners are our clients and our co-creators. This experience was very special to witness and be a part of. Diego from Terremoto never really gardened before, and as Alfredo said in the video, he was a quick study. And because they had a shared language, the ease with which they got to know one another and work quickly and enjoyably together was very apparent. And so since then, Terremoto would like to incorporate this type of collaboration more, to cultivate this kind of long-term relationship between the designer, the gardener, and the garden itself as it evolves. But with other designers, the language barrier is real, as are kind of time constraints and budgetary constraints. So the question remains, how could this type of direct human connection and mutual learning be factored in to the design contract for design work. Oops. So throughout the project, many conversations were had around how to shift contracts and what to add and how to kind of modify phasing. In the end, we didn't have one answer. I created this dream board, which is like an oversized game of sorts that asks viewers to reconsider the standard processes of design and construction and dream of new sequences, adjacencies, and financing. So what would happen if gardening the site happened first? What if construction bids weren't free? What if a large share of the budget was dedicated to on-site collaboration through mock-ups, for example? With Reed Hildebrand, from the beginning of the project, we were really curious about the transmission of ideas from the architectural office to the hands of manual laborers. We know that at some point, the drawings just disappear. And the hands-on guys, they don't see the drawings, but they build them. So like, how are they instructed in their work? How do they understand the design? How can we draw better or communicate differently to create a sense of ownership and empowerment for the laborers in what they create in their work? One drawing in the exhibition shows a construction document for a complicated paving pattern for a Reed Hildebrand project, and then interwoven, and kind of overtaking the drawing in all its detail are the verbal instructions in Spanish given by the designer to the masonry workers so that they could actually get the design built. And in the end, it wasn't the drawing that allowed that to happen. It was these words, and it was the designer, the person there. As part of increasing connection and communication with laborers within the workflow of the project, my colleagues at Reed Hildebrand, we tried an informal gathering with a crew of guest workers from Guatemala, building a Reed Hildebrand project in New Hampshire. So we organized this social lunch toward the end of construction and the start of plant installation. And the goal was to discuss the design itself with the workers, with the crew. We wanted to know what their experiences were, what they enjoyed, what didn't work, and what questions they had, directly with the designers of the project themselves. And maybe if you haven't worked in practice yet, you might not know, but this doesn't usually happen, this kind of like direct communication. So the three designers brought drawings of the project and discussed the design intent with the crew, from the sourcing of materials to the placement of the various zones to the hierarchy of the plantings and other such kind of details. And the crew had never seen the drawings before, neither the renderings nor the schematic plans. So, they never even see the construction documents, which to me feels like a big, a big void in their own like knowledge and understanding. Typically, they're instructed on site by someone who has seen the drawings, usually a foreman, but they were all really enthusiastic about seeing these early on, and they wanted to understand the design intent and the design concept at the beginning of construction. So again, how can this type of relational work be factored into the phasing and the budgets of the design firm? One surprise from this meeting was that when asked what their favorite part of the design was to build, the workers, most of them said that it was this stonework around the jacuzzi. And this was by all accounts like the most difficult part of the project. And it was like subject to many change orders and adjustments as the project wore on. And for the designers, it was like just an extremely challenging period. So the idea that this kind of like the most intense and grueling labor could also be like the most fulfilling for them was really notable. It was their favorite part, and here they are talking about that. The importance of a shared language is really critical. So in this project, workers at every level that we worked with, landscape contractors, designers, manual laborers, all agreed that without a shared language, relationship is impossible. Some of the goals of my work, which are creating space for agency of workers within their work and co-creation of design on the shared ground of intellectual and physical knowledge, won't happen without it. And so to create this new type of landscape work designers, I think, need to speak Spanish. And in order to, we have to speak Spanish in order to step outside of the hierarchies of geographic fortune. These construction documents, they're for a Terremoto project that you saw in that first film, were translated into Spanish for the exhibition, and it was no easy task. I'm a fairly fluent Spanish speaker, but I don't know construction language, so it was difficult. But I still believe that the effort is worthwhile to speak Spanish, and I believe that the impetus to learn new forms of communication should be placed on those with more privilege and power. So to that end, I've been gathering signatures on this open letter to landscape architecture accreditation boards on the topic of immigrant landscape labor. And inside of it, it includes the recommendation of Spanish language training for the education and licensure of landscape architects. And I relate this similarly to getting advanced degrees in law or medicine. It's often required to speak the language of your public. And I think landscape architecture should be the same. So I would love your signature and support. You can sign the letter with that link. Another important insight we've been struck by in this project is that manual laborers who are often in precarious and invisible roles in society aren't used to being asked. They're not used to being asked for their opinions, for their expertise, for accounts of their experience even. So while some of our work in this project has focused on changing flows of communication or workflows, what that really centers on is building a safe space for immigrant laborers to feel empowered, to have opinions, and to feel secure in communicating them. And these hierarchies are deeply ingrained in all of us, and they will be hard to deconstruct. But the process itself, if we want a new world of work that is more equitable, more just, enlivened, more collective, more relational, then that world of work must be co-created with the manual laborers who construct and maintain landscapes. So one important product of the project is this work in progress pamphlet that was exhibited in the gallery. This distills the applied research and it attempts to communicate it in very simple terms and provides clear direction on steps any landscape architecture firm can take right now. There's like template letters to use to send to clients and contractors to start these kind of what may be difficult conversations, but to get those discussions rolling. And in it, we hope to invigorate greater co-creation. You can download the pamphlet at this link. Greater co-creation between builders, gardeners, and designers. So as well, we hope to design forms of increased agency and empowerment for the manual laborers that we work with. So these guidelines in the pamphlet support the cultivation of our work toward care, fulfillment, and justice. So that's why I call it we are a work in progress. And so one thing that I've realized in the making of the Jardineros project is that, which this project has come into being in dire and dreadful times for immigrants in this country, is that our direct connection to immigrants' lives is one of the most important aspects of our work as landscape architects. It's often not thought of as part of the site of design, but inevitably it is. And how we conduct ourselves through our work is powerful and meaningful. So I will end there, but leave you with another short film. This one is called Carmen. It's about 11 minutes long, and Carmen's story hits home for me, I think, especially the importance of the kind of relations that we can build, that we have the potential to build through our work. Thanks for listening and watching. I'll appreciate hearing your questions and comments afterwards. Oh, thank you.
David dijo que tenías una historia chistosa de Barranca. ¿Cómo se llama tu?
Sí, yo nací en Jalisco, México, pero en un lugar, una barranca, pues. Y nosotros no había carretera, no había luz, no había agua potable. Agarrábamos el agua con buckets, los alumbrábamos con un aparato de petróleo, con mecha. Y salíamos a los pueblos, a los ranchos, y cuando nos miraban salir nos decían, hoy vienen las barrancas. Y yo, cuando comencé el negocio, le pregunté a mi hijo qué creía que debía de ponerle en el negocio. Y me dijo, ponle barranca. ¿Y por qué? Dice, porque eso te va a ayudar a subir por de dónde vienes y cómo te trataban. Y sí, me ayudó mucho. Y ahora me miran, soy barranca, pues miran mis tocas, mis cosas, mi trabajo. Y han trabajado para muchas personas de ellos. Es más, no se trata de ser mejor que ellos, sino nada más sentirse orgulloso de donde nació.
Y cuando me puedes decir un poco cómo llegaste a Estados Unidos, qué edad tenías, cómo era?
Yo tenía 18 años. Llegué a un lugar que se llama Silverado Canyon, en un rancho. Vivíamos 12 muchachos en una casita, como una big trailer. Y una vida triste. Yo venía de ser solitario en mi rancho, porque mi rancho nomás yo era, ¿no? Son 2 casas. Y yo no tuve escuela, y nunca fui a la escuela.
Nunca.
No fui a la escuela donde yo estuve. Y llegué con ellos y aprendí mucho porque me senté muchos y eran muy vagos, unos usaban drogas, otros usaban. Y yo tuve que superar eso, tuve que vivir con ellos hasta que pude. Compré un pickup truck y viví en mi troca por año y medio. Y luego viví en una trailer que me prestaron y luego compré mi condominio y así fui subiendo.
¿En qué trabajaste?
Siempre trabajé en landscape,
Siempre.
todo, desde que llegué aquí, landscape.
Y antes de llegar a Estados Unidos, ¿conocías jardinería o landscape?
Bueno, nosotros nacimos en un rancho, teníamos muchos árboles frutales, teníamos vacas, animales de todos, siempre crecíamos nuestra propia comida. Nosotros sembrábamos maíz y lo guardábamos para el año, sembrábamos rábanos, cebollas y tomates y comíamos de lo de nosotros. Hacíamos nuestro propio queso, nuestro propio vivimos de los niños, de nosotros. Y yo llevaba fruta a vender en un burro, en cajas. al pueblo. Como 4 horas y media a caballo para llegar al pueblo. Y yo en un caballo realmente en burro. Y así me recibimos. Sí.
Entonces tenías familia, este tipo de trabajo.
Sí, me gusta mucho. Me gusta mucho porque es lo que yo hacía. Nosotros agarramos agua de los árboles para regar plantas, sí, hacemos presas, hacemos como canales, pero le llamábamos sequias para echar el agua a los árboles. Cada año llovía, el agua se llevaban las y lo volvimos a construir cada año. Yo no venía, no sabía que venía. Bueno, sí, porque mi hermano que está ahí, él estaba aquí. Y cuando llegué empecé a trabajar con él. Sí, yo comencé mi negocio después de trabajar con 2 compañías. Ya decidí salirme de mi trabajo y llegué a mi casa. Yo siempre tenía un cargo de la compañía. Y llegué y le dije a mi esposa, ya entregué el cargo, ya voy a trabajar para mí. Y tenía amigos, les llamé, necesito trabajo, si me puedes. Mi primer trabajo yo vivía en Riverside y era en Santa Bárbara. Iba a trabajar, me quedaba en mi troca.
Los días en que vas al trabajo y la vida era más difícil que imaginabas tener la salud que tienes hoy.
En realidad no, pero yo siempre he sabido escalar. Nunca me quedo. Tengo mi familia, mi esposa y mi hijo nada más. Y siempre decía, vamos a movernos a esto, vamos a hacer esto. Pero ¿por qué? Yo siempre voy siempre me gusta ir hacia adelante. Y me ha funcionado. Sí. No sé, nosotros podemos hacer algo por el trabajador, pero no entiendo qué podemos hacer. No entiendo. No sé. Yo tengo mis compañeros de trabajo y yo me gusta tomar, yo les doy lo que puedo, lo que piden, comparto con ellos lo que yo puedo y no sé qué puedo hacer mejor. No sé, es que para eso, como yo no estudié para nada, todo lo he aprendido aquí. Aprendí, pues en la vida aprendí a escribir, a leer, llegué aquí no hablaba ni una palabra en inglés y ya no podía todo, pero por eso pienso que cada quien construye su vida. Eso pienso.
¿Crees que es un trabajo bueno para los inmigrantes?
Sí.
¿Por qué?
Yo creo que la construcción, esto nunca se va a acabar. Esto va a seguir. Muchos trabajos se van a acabar, se van cambiando, porque eso sí nunca pensé en mi vida, estar con gentes como ustedes. Y no, pues nunca pensé. yo no creí que yo iba a estar. Cuando yo era muy chico tenía era fan de un grupo de música mexicana, se llamaba Los Bookies. Y nunca pensé en ellos. Y ya 2 veces que me pagan ellos el boleto para ir a verlos a Las Vegas. Y ya he estado comiendo con ellos, han estado algunos en mi casa, he estado en fiestas privadas de ellos y me siento orgulloso, al igual que con ustedes, todos. Dios da mucho y aquí estamos.
Dices el terremoto.
Sí, el terremoto,
Estamos en
sí, que es como todo es importante, cada paso es bonito, cada persona vale mucho. Y sin las personas no somos nada. Entonces, cada día siento lo que es algo, la verdad.
Thanks for watching.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. Really
Thanks,
moving.
Sarah.
So we had time for maybe 2 or 3 questions. So just raise your hand and I'll send the mic through. Oh, okay.
Thank you, Michelle, for an amazing presentation. Wonderful to see the issues of labor and immigrant labor into our conversation. But I want to ask you to elaborate on the issue of drawings. I think one thing that stayed with me from your presentation is this idea of the drawing as a divider, as a social divider between the landscape designer, the architect, and the worker. Something that I first read from Sérgio Ferro from decades ago, but more and more I think of drawing as a tool of inequality.
Of equality?
Yeah, a tool that promotes inequality.
Promotes inequality.
The drawing.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, what are we doing in our schools? Because we teach mostly this inequality instrument.
I absolutely agree, but I think it's a very controversial take, right? To say we're doing it wrong. We're like, drawings are power, and they are kind of our jurisdiction, and they are the power of the architect, of the landscape architect. But to have power is to exercise power over others. And in many ways, like, because we know how to draw, we know how to read the drawings, we are in control, right? And so there is no agency for others who don't have that. And so, yeah, I mean, I am in complete agreement with you, and I'm curious about not drawing, or drawing less, or drawing with gaps, or drawing, to be determined with landscape architect on site more, right? To specify moments of collaboration within our drawings, to leave even our construction documents more open-ended, because the less we draw, the less we specify, the more agency builders have in terms of executing that work. So that's one aspect. And then the other aspect is, which Jenny from Terremoto always asks me when every time we see each other, we have this conversation, and she's always says, but does that, like, cause more work, more undesired work for the builders and the contractors when we are leaving gaps, when we are leaving things more open-ended. Like, do they want that? And I think that sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So again, it's a question of co-creation and having a relationship with like a builder or a gardener to know like in what moments do they want agency and in what moments do they want direction. In terms of pedagogy, yeah, it's tricky. We teach drawing, right? We teach communication. And so I'm interested in thinking about other forms of drawing that are not so precise, that are maybe more notational, that are meant to be interpreted. Like, of course, all drawings are interpreted, right? But they're proactively drawn. The like agency of interpretation is like part of their construction. And so I think those new forms of drawing will also allow us to have new forms of working together.
Thank you so much. This was incredible.
Thank you.
This is so important. And I was a gardener for a long time before coming to school. I ended up here in a very roundabout way. And
The scenic route.
and I'm going right back. I mean, I can't say this anytime. But to your point, sir, the drawings when I came here were entirely illegible. Like I had a really hard time. It was very hard to read. And there was an entire section of knowledge that I had that was I had to really fight to have it validated in school. And I'm not regretting it here. It's great. I mean, it's such a privilege. But I just wish there was a little more acknowledgement of the medium that we're actually working in, the limit of our expertise in the pedagogy. And also to your point about like mandatory Spanish classes, 100% agree. Speaking Spanish has been fantastic for working and communicating ideas of design. But I mean, there needs to be practical application of these drawings in school, in my opinion. Like we need to know what we're asking of construction workers, of gardeners, when we're specifying something. Because there's a lot we can learn from those people when it's happening, but also, I mean, like, to, make that process more efficient.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. I appreciate, I don't know, the notion of like what you learn in school versus what you learn, previous to school, your gardening experience, for example, landscaping experience, and then what you learn in terms of drawings when then you leave school and then you're working in practice. There's tons of types of drawings that you learn not in graduate school, right? Like you only learn on the job. And those are the drawings that are really specific to construction. And even then, those drawings aren't read by the people who are like hands-on building the thing. So, yeah, I mean, I think in school we just don't learn a lot of the realities of practice. And that's not, that's just how it is. And it sort of depends on the program too. But it's curious you said that our drawings or our school experience should engage more with our actual medium. And I'm curious, like, well, what is that medium? Because the medium, is it the landscape? Is it the garden? I would venture that, like, we could even consider, like, the relationships as part of our medium.
This one? Yeah. Hi. Beautiful talk. Thank you so much. I loved the reference to Michelle Arevalos, and I was thinking about her very early piece called I Make Maintenance Art Every Day, where she gave Polaroid cameras to office cleaners to take a photograph of when they were making art and when they were doing maintenance. label them. And so I was curious, what were your takeaways of the photographs that were made by the gardeners? Were there certain things that you found compelling, or I was just curious how you read them as a collection. I loved the way that you relayed them in the common bond as well.
Yeah.
But it was a great project, and I was curious what the takeaways were.
Thank you. I mean, I thought they were stunning, just like really beautiful. And I have a background in photography, so I have a BFA in photography, and I worked in like the most elite spaces of art, you know, production and sales in New York in the photography world. And so like it's my background, but like just the actual images that they were creating were so beautiful. Like, so I was just completely impressed with them. And the two gardeners, the Jardineros that took the photo, their photographs were totally different than the construction workers' photographs. And the gardeners were very kind of like evocative and a lot of plants. These are like living landscapes. They're not landscapes that are being constructed. One of them was, one of the gardeners was very much taking pictures of people in the garden. So taking pictures of me and of folks from Terremoto and of like maybe the clients. I don't know, like lots of people moving through the garden. So that seemed to be his interest. And then the other gardener was using the flash in the daytime, and it would just like really like punchy contrast and like just very contemporary imagery. And they both did a lot of self-portraits, which I thought was really beautiful as well. And the construction workers' photographs were super interesting because so many of them, they were quick, you know, they're like iPhone, they're camera photographs, and they're just like documenting this stage of the process. I'm sending this to my boss. This is what we did today, type of photographs. But many of the compositions are like quite beautiful, and they often include like the photographer's like feet or shadows. You know, it's like Lee Friedlander, it's like Gary Winogrand. Like there's just like these echoes of like fine art photography in many of the images, and they're also just like very honest appraisals of what the scene looked like. You know, they're not trying to make it prettier or make it aesthetic, but maybe it's just me, but I find those scenes like compelling and very beautiful, and like I'm fascinated by it. So yeah. In the exhibit, I had all these images from the construction workers from the Builder Trend app, and I had no idea how I was going to present them until we were like in the gallery, and I was just like, well, I don't know. And I thought of like, oh, a masonry course scene, and started like looking them up, and there was one that was called Common Bond, and I was just like, that's it. Like, it makes so much sense, you know? So that's an interesting dynamic of like having the material, the photographs, and then like how to present them in a way also that's compelling.
Thank you so much. I'm curious, adding on to that question, whether any of the gardeners or the construction workers were able to see the exhibit, or whether they had their own interpretations of the photos that they took.
Not yet. It just opened like 10 days ago. So that's my goal, though. So I'm in Ohio, and much of the work was done in Los Angeles, and some of it also in Massachusetts. So no, they haven't seen it yet. But I hope that to take the exhibition to a venue in Los Angeles, and also one in Massachusetts. So hopefully we can make that community peer review thing happen for sure. And if not, I'll get it to them one way or another. But it was very important to me to also like credit all of them carefully, right? So for all of those images, there were only like 5 different photographers of all of those images. So there were some workers who had more of a keen eye for photography than others, which was like interesting to understand as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Michelle. Thank
You're
you all.
welcome. Thank you.